Scott finally said what he shouldn't have. "From next month, I'll be living with Mom, so please clear out your room. I'll bring her directly here once she's discharged from the hospital. It's easier to manage the household when living together." However, seeing my mother-in-law every day means constantly receiving her snide remarks. My heart is already heavy. "I understand," I replied helplessly. Scott intends to force the issue of living with his mother by any means necessary. Rather than arguing and opposing him, I should secretly prepare. I have gained this wisdom over many years. Scott left the house, looking pleased and without suspicion. This is my strategy. It's so simple, I almost laughed. Hours later, while I was resting after tidying up, my phone rang loudly. It was a surprise call from Scott. "What is this?" "The house is empty. I, Charlotte Stewart, am a 45-year-old working mother who serves as a department head at a publishing house. My family consists of my husband and 2 children, a very ordinary household. When we got married, the concept of balancing work and family life was becoming popular. At that time, it was common for women to become housewives after marriage, but Scott supported my decision to work. In response, I have devoted myself to my job, household chores, and childcare since the birth of our children. However, recently, I felt the limit of this burden deepening. My mother-in-law, Michelle, who had always opposed my employment, has recently started to complain. "Charlotte, how long do you intend to keep working? You're neglecting your husband and being an irresponsible daughter-in-law." In our time, work came second, and a wife's duty was to devote herself to the family, she said. "Not only have I been committed to my job, but I've also been diligent in housekeeping and childcare. I felt this was a way to repay Scott for allowing me to work. As a result, both my daughter and son began to help out around the house. My daughter folds the laundry and irons, while my son cleans the bath and fills the tub every day. When I return home, the children have already prepared everything so that I only need to manage the meal preparation and cleanup. I am grateful to them for this arrangement." However, despite both of us working, Scott does not help at all. I've asked him several times to assist with household chores, but his response is always the same. "I allowed you to continue your job. Are you trying to make me do the housework because you want to ease your own burden without fulfilling your duties as a wife? You're being pampered." Additionally, each time this happens, he reports to my mother-in-law, and I receive cold words from her. "Scott is the main breadwinner of the house, right? Why would you make him do the housework? That's why it's said that working women are not good. Understand? You're the one demanding to work. Comprehend that." Lately, perhaps my mother-in-law has too much free time. Every night, such unpleasant calls come in. Both my children and I are tired of the frequency and content of these calls. Recently, my children often pretend they are calling me to hang up the phone. Indeed, I'm grateful that I was allowed to work, but why must I be criticized so much? I'm handling both housework and childcare alone. Even my mother-in-law should understand how hard it is to balance housework and childcare. What does she want from me? Currently, I am under considerable stress. Having my children on my side is my only comfort. This feeling is due to issues related to Scott's salary. In fact, Scott's salary is not very high, rather, it's on the lower end. He failed to find a good job initially and managed to get a position at a small company through relatives. If he had strived, I would have supported him without complaint, despite the low income. However, Scott was disappointed with his employment through connections. At first, he often complained I should have worked at a much larger and more prestigious company. He just did the work he was told to do and neglected efforts for promotion or to find another job. If he really had the skills, he would have continued to learn and upgrade his skills while working and made efforts to find a new job. But Scott neglected such efforts. As a result, his salary has remained limited to minor raises, with his performance pay and commissions always minimal. On the other hand, the company where I work is a major domestic firm that established maternity and paternity leave systems early on, and has continued stable management even during economic bubbles, never reducing salaries. Currently, I have been promoted to department head and have successfully managed numerous contracts and projects. As a result, I earn considerably more than Scott. Additionally, my children are under my care, and I directly set aside their tuition fees from my salary. I have made the most of the corporate benefits of a large company. Looking back, even when I was on unpaid maternity leave, we lived off my savings. It would have been impossible to cover the household expenses, including those of our children, with just Scott's salary. I have never received any contribution towards household expenses from Scott, and there are no records of any transfers from him. He probably allowed me to continue working because he wanted to rely on my salary. This thought has been growing stronger recently. I suspect that our post-marriage life has been largely financed by my earnings. To verify this suspicion, I checked my bank account. Housing expenses, utilities, food, and the children's educational expenses. I've paid for all of them. There's not a single deposit from Scott. All I could do was laugh tiredly. Scott's salary is spent on his hobbies and sending money to his mother. I've been grateful that Scott allowed me to continue working and have taken on both household chores and childcare. However, looking at the current situation, I pay all the living expenses while Scott freely spends his own salary. As the main financial supporter, I can say that I am the pillar of the family. Scott can afford to act freely because I cover the living expenses, and any favor of letting me work has been fully repaid. Yet, Scott always says, "I'm supporting the family. If you have a complaint, you can leave." On what basis does he make such claims? He might be under the mistaken impression that he's handling the living expenses while freely spending his own salary. It's completely baffling and incomprehensible. Sometimes I think about the outcome if I took the children and left the house, excluding all living expenses I've been covering. Or if I confronted him with this bank account and ordered him to leave the house, would Scott obediently comply? However, claiming himself as the pillar of the household, he might report me again to his mother. Does his mother understand the difference in our incomes? No, if she did, she wouldn't make such sarcastic remarks. She must think of him as a wonderful son who supports the family and has graciously allowed me to work. How would she react if she knew the truth about our incomes? Perhaps she would turn against Scott and come to my side. However, I want to avoid such a situation. What would become of Scott and his mother if I left? Sometimes, fed up with her harsh words, I find myself pondering this. While I was lost in these thoughts, my mother-in-law fell at home and injured her leg. She will need to be hospitalized for a while for treatment and rehabilitation. Since my father-in-law passed away before our marriage and she lived alone, either Scott or I would need to take care of her. Why are you leaving me to suffer? Hurry to the hospital. My leg hurts so much I can't move, and there's a lot I need to ask of you. She called me immediately during her hospitalization. When I answer the phone, she only demands things bring this. I want that. When I tell her I'm at work, she berates me fiercely. Because of my busy work schedule, I've decided to leave her care to Scott. The cold remarks from her due to my job are particularly stressful. Now, I think the best solution is to have Scott go to the hospital and placate his mother. When I ask Scott to take care of his mother, he immediately complains. "Why don't you look after Mom, Charlotte? I'm working too," he says. Despite being her son, he tries to push all the responsibility onto me. I think he should handle it himself, at least for the first few times. Suppressing my feelings, I respond, "I'm also working, and there are household chores. If you could help with the housework, I could go too. I think your mother would be happier to see you there." This is the truth. My mother-in-law may think of harassing her daughter-in-law as a way to relieve stress, but when mobility is limited, it's better to think positively and speak positively. For various reasons, I have been intentionally avoiding caring for my mother-in-law. On the other hand, I take care to wash and fold her laundry neatly and pack it in her bag. When she requests shopping, I pay close attention to the specific products she wants. I don't mind if these are seen as Scott's achievements, even if I am the one who is criticized. Right now, I especially want to avoid hearing her sarcasm. Fortunately, my predictions were correct. Day by day, my mother-in-law greets Scott with a smile. Being pampered by her son seems to greatly please a mother with her personality. Having her beloved son nearby seems to make her happier than making sarcastic remarks. She eagerly awaits Scott's visits every evening after work, looking forward to their conversations. She hands the shopping list to Scott, and since her hospitalization, she hasn't called me even once. Seeing her smile, Scott feels he is doing good deeds, and he returns home in a good mood. At night, when Scott comes home, he passes me the laundry and shopping lists without complaining as before. Although I receive some grumbles from Scott when handing over her belongings, I still manage to live my days peacefully. That's enough for me. Right now, I am determined to avoid my mother-in-law's sarcasm at all costs. Sometimes, I mutter to myself in the middle of the night, if only I could live in peace for a little while longer. However, the injuries my mother-in-law sustained at her age are likely to be prolonged. I strongly urged Scott to encourage her rehabilitation, but she often neglected it, looking forward to her son's visits. As a result, by the time her injuries healed, her leg strength had already declined. Scott goes to the hospital in the evening after work, but until then, my mother-in-law simply waits, abandoning rehabilitation and just anticipating her son's visit. She has grown fond of her son's care, and Scott has become accustomed to her various requests. Although it's rare for me to be called directly, I am actually the one doing the laundry. Daily chores like shopping and preparing snacks have become routine. My mother-in-law imposes household tasks on me, and she just enjoys pleasant conversations with her son. I'm grateful I don't have to meet her directly, but it's still exhausting. Her demands are many, especially shopping, which is very time-consuming. I understand that you need to distract yourself from boredom, but why do you need so many things? Living alone becomes even more difficult when mobility is impaired. My mother-in-law must feel this too. At that time, she made a significant request to Scott. "Oh, I can't use my leg well anymore. Shopping and cooking are difficult. Scott, don't leave your mom alone." Of course, Scott supports her. "That's a good idea. Let's live together. It will be more convenient for you if Charlotte takes care of you." These two decided to live together without considering my opinion. Scott finally said what he shouldn't have. "From next month, I'll be living with Mom, so please clear out your room. I'll bring her directly here once she's discharged from the hospital. It's easier to manage the household when living together. But that's only from the perspective of the mother-in-law. Every day, facing my mother-in-law would only result in receiving her snide remarks. My heart is already heavy. I understand, I replied helplessly. Scott intends to force the issue of living with his mother by any means necessary. Rather than arguing and opposing him, I should secretly prepare. I have gained this wisdom over many years. Caught between the excitement of Scott and my mother-in-law about the cohabitation, I was considering my escape options. I have a personal room in our home where I gather and study business-related documents. This room contains many books and files. It serves as a study and a workspace, and it is an essential space for the current me. However, Scott has demanded that I give up that room. Losing that room could disrupt my work, potentially causing me to come home even later. Alone, looking at the bookshelf, I muttered to myself, what should I do with these books and documents? It would be a big problem if they were discarded or damaged. Considering living with my mother-in-law, it's clear that these items should not stay at home. It may sound like something out of a TV show, but there really is a risk of the books and documents being thrown away. Especially, the items that are known to be valuable to me are often the first to be tampered with. If I say something, my mother-in-law will feign ignorance and seek Scott's help. Oh, I didn't know these were important documents. Oh, Scott, I'm not at fault yet Charlotte is mad at me. Help me. Once we start living together, there will be no place for me to rest in this house. Continuing to work while being constantly blamed, my spirit will wear thin. What should I do? In this house. Because my mother-in-law is coming to this house, I am. Suddenly, an idea struck me. Why hadn't I realized this simple solution earlier? It seems I was more exhausted than I thought from dealing with her cold remarks and taking over caregiving. It felt as though the fog that had been clouding my vision was gradually lifting. Right, there's absolutely no reason for me to hold back. Why didn't I see such a simple thing before? I murmured and immediately began to prepare. Time passed, and the day of my mother-in-law's discharge arrived. Scott had taken the day off and seemed excited from the morning. Look, from now on, I'll properly take care of Mom. I won't let you do what I've been doing while she was hospitalized, Scott declared, and I quickly changed the subject. That's right, take this. Your mother has been hospitalized for quite a while, after all. The hospital food is bland and not very filling, so she must have been unsatisfied. Since discharge procedures and packing will take us close to lunchtime, why don't you take her out for some delicious food? It's a special day off, and a drive just for the two of you would be nice, right? I'm sure she will enjoy it, I suggested, handing Scott a larger amount of cash than usual. While Scott did have an allowance for living expenses, the amount I gave him this time was significantly more than his usual monthly allowance. Scott was thrilled by the unexpected windfall. Wow, you really think on your feet, don't you? Then I'll use this money to take Mom out for a drive. I'll let you know what we decide about dinner. You make sure everything at home is ready for Mom to be comfortable. Scott left the house happily, without any suspicion. This was my strategy. It was so simple, it almost made me laugh. This should buy me some time. I was eager for Scott and his mother to return home. While waiting, I proceeded to organize the house. I needed to finish arranging everything before Scott and his mother returned. A few hours later, while I was resting after finishing the organization, My phone rang loudly. It was a surprise call from Scott. "What's this?" "The house is empty." In fact, while Scott was out picking up his mother, I had moved my belongings to a new house I had rented. Of course, I had left behind only Scott's few personal items and his mother's bedding. "Oh, you're back already? You said to clear out the room, so I cleared out the room and the living room to make sure your mother could be comfortable. Now, you two can enjoy your time together," I replied calmly. Scott exploded in anger. "This isn't a joke. There's nothing left in the living room or kitchen. How could you do this when I'm the one supporting us?" The familiar line was thrown out again. How foolish to believe that he could demonstrate superiority. No, in reality, I was the one supporting the family, and that included you. You've been spending your salary on allowances for your mother and on your own pleasures, haven't you? And even asking for personal spending money from the household budget. How can you claim that you are supporting the family with such actions? Scott was surprised by my challenge but quickly retorted. His theory was completely nonsensical. "Quiet. As a man, I am the head of the house. You, as my wife, should obey. Put the furniture back immediately." "No, I won't. The living room furniture and the kitchen appliances were all purchased with my salary. Don't worry, the children are with me. I've paid for the rent, utilities, and groceries. In short, I am the pillar of this house. Why did you proceed to live with your mother without consulting me? I can't stay with someone who acts so unilaterally. As you wished, from now on you'll have to fend for yourself," I said. And it seemed like Scott had an epiphany. "Wait, what about the rent for this house?" "Yes, I will cover all payments until the end of this month, but from next month, I'll pass that responsibility to you. The payments for electricity, gas, and internet have already had their direct debit stopped, so you'll need to manage those yourself," I said. It seemed Scott finally understood the situation. In response, his mother exploded in anger, raising her voice in a frenzy. "I can't believe I have such a terrifying daughter-in-law. What are you thinking, using the fact you work to pressure him? Enough is enough. I plan to live here luxuriously with Scott." At that moment, I wondered if she truly understood the reality of Scott's income. Living a luxurious life would indeed be wonderful. However, whether that's possible depends on your son's income. "Anyway, this is goodbye," I said calmly. "Wait, Charlotte, where are you?" Scott asked, but I hung up the phone and immediately blocked both his and his mother's contacts. What follows is as you might imagine. With Scott's salary from a small company where he showed little initiative, the amount left after paying rent and utilities was very minimal. In a house too large for a family of 4, Scott and his mother frequently clashed. "What is this? What kind of meal is this? Don't you care to feed your parents something decent?" His mother would scream. "Be quiet. If you have a complaint, make something yourself. You skip rehab and hate walking. You don't help with the housework at all. You're just a burden," Scott would retort. Thus, their lives seemed to be filled with tension and dissatisfaction. Due to neglecting rehab, his mother's leg strength had deteriorated, and she had become completely resistant to any form of physical therapy at home. Her inability to move as smoothly as before likely contributed to significant frustration. The woman who once showed deep affection for Scott had transformed, making unreasonable demands. Her change might be a symptom of early-stage dementia. Her pension alone places them in a very tough situation. If they move to a smaller, more suitable residence for two, their life would likely become much easier. However, Scott doesn't seem to come up with such creative solutions. Since I cut off communication with Scott and his mother, I haven't received any messages from them. The children also blocked Scott and his mother's contacts when we started a new chapter as a family. Currently, Scott doesn't know where we live, and he has completely lost any means to seek help from us. If this situation continues, their living conditions will likely become unsustainable. With the help of my children, I've been able to secure a decent income and a nice apartment. The children each have their own rooms, and I use a spacious room as both my bedroom and workspace. The rent is a bit high, but the amount saved by separating from Scott allows us to comfortably afford it. Previously, the children suffered from their father's demeaning words towards me, but now they are enjoying a free and comfortable life. They are more serious about household chores now and take responsibility for their tasks without being criticized by their father, willingly helping around the house. In such an environment where gratitude and praise are naturally extended when children help, I am truly relieved that we haven't gone down the wrong path. Today, after another busy day, it's time to return to the apartment where my beloved children are waiting. Following these developments, I sent Scott a divorce petition through a lawyer. Despite me having supported the family financially for a long time, he and his mother had nearly depleted their earnings. This is a sufficient reason to file for divorce. Scott refused the divorce and made various excuses, but my lawyer quickly dismissed his claims. Abandoning family responsibilities, not contributing financially, and verbal abuse are considered economic abuse. Under these circumstances, if taken to court, Scott's chances of winning are extremely low. The court granted me custody of the children. Furthermore, I did not request alimony or property division, choosing instead to waive those rights. Because the savings I accumulated have all been earmarked for the children's future education, it would be completely unacceptable for me to give any of that money to Scott or his mother. My car is in my name, and fortunately, the house we lived in was a rental property, which helped us avoid further complications that could have arisen had we owned a home. Now, without facing criticism from anyone, I am able to focus on my work. This allows me to provide the kind of activities my children desire, for which I am grateful. Additionally, with the college funds that I have been gradually saving over time, combined with future income, I anticipate being able to cover at least the cost of my children's university education. Let's give today our all. I motivate myself as a new day begins.
I'm going to live in this high-rise apartment with my mom. I want a divorce. I couldn't hide my confusion at the sudden statement my husband made. It seems like my husband was planning to live in the high-rise apartment I inherited from my father with his mother after our divorce. I wonder what he's thinking. I have had my share of frustrations regarding my husband ever since our marriage. Yet, I never considered divorce because there were aspects of him I respected. However, I never dreamt he would suggest starting a life with his mother in the home I inherited. As I stood dumbfounded, my husband, with a condescending smile, said, "I'll divorce you and just take this property." I must be really lucky. Seriously. The moment I saw his unpleasant smile, my love for him completely vanished. My name is Stacy. I'm a 28-year-old office worker. I managed to join the company I've long admired as a new graduate and have been vigorously working ever since. People often say, "You're a typical career woman." Being devoted to my job, I had never experienced a serious relationship, and neither was I particularly keen on marriage, thinking that living alone wasn't such a bad idea. Yet, a turning point in my life came. One day, my father called me with an unexpected proposition. "Stacy, you're 28 now. How about trying matchmaking? I received an offer from someone I owe a favor to. What matchmaking? I think I'll pass. I still want to work. I was surprised and declined immediately as I had never considered matchmaking. Don't say that. Why not try meeting him just once? If you find a nice partner, I'll also be able to rest assured. I want to see you as a bride. How can I refuse if you put it like that? Fine. I'll meet him. My father had been unwell for several months and was currently being cared for by my mother at home. His health hasn't been great recently. Knowing his condition, I couldn't ignore my father's wish to see me as a bride, so I was left with no choice but to accept to meet up with the guy he wanted to match me with. That's great, Stacy. Thank you. I hope you get along well with him. Yes, I'd be happy if he's passionate about his work. The day of the meetup arrived. The man, Ted, was 27 years old, a year younger than me. He loved his job so much that he never got to stay in a long-lasting relationship because he was so busy. Seems like we're a pretty good match. I've also prioritized work over everything else so far. Really? We might get along well then. Ted smiled kindly. We hit it off quickly, and before we knew it, we were married. Our parents were very happy, and we were blessed by many as we started our newlywed life in a rented apartment. Later, my parents bought a high-rise apartment nearby and moved in. It was challenging for them to live in the countryside. Having my parents close by was better for frequent visits and immediate support, so I was pleased they decided to move into the high-rise apartment. 2 years had passed since Dad and I got married. Our marriage, which started off smoothly, gradually began to face troubles. The issue was Ted's growing fondness for his mother, frequently inviting her over without discussing it with me. I wanted to spend quiet weekends after a busy week, but Ted started inviting his mother over without consulting me. His mother lived about a 10-minute drive from our place, and she had been living alone ever since my father-in-law passed away 5 years ago. While he initially didn't invite his mother frequently, he recently started to invite her over every week. Oh, right. My mom is coming over today. When Ted casually mentioned it, I couldn't hold back any longer. What, again? But she was here last week and the week before. I wish we could spend some time alone occasionally. What are you saying? Since my dad's passing, she's been feeling lonely. What's wrong with inviting her over once a week? Ted yelled, furious at my suggestion. I might have accepted the weekly visits if his mother were kinder. But every time she would come over, she would take groceries and household items without even asking. Even when I protested, "It bothers me when you take things without permission," she would respond, "Don't be so stingy. You're working, no?" and dismissed my concerns. Furthermore, she criticized every little thing, from a speck of dust in the corner to the seasoning of my cooking, and would always be critical of how I managed household chores. What was worse was, she did these things out of Ted's sight, which made the problem even more serious. Ted thought of his mother as someone who, despite her sad fate of losing her spouse, lived a modest life alone. Ted, I've told you before, but your mother takes groceries without asking and always finds something to criticize about how I manage the household. It's frustrating, I said. You're lying again. My mom would never do such a thing. Stop belittling her. Ted shouted back, clearly angry. No matter how much I explained, Ted refused to listen. He loved his mother dearly and trusted her completely. Because of this ongoing situation, my affection for Ted had gradually faded. However, aside from the issue with his mother, Ted was rational. He was dedicated and diligent in his work, respected by his colleagues and subordinates, and often received calls for work-related consultations. I, too, am someone who dedicates herself to her work, so I appreciated Ted's work ethic. Although his company wasn't very large, and his salary wasn't high, he worked hard and earnestly there. This respect for him prevented me from considering divorce at that time. But around the same time, my father, who had been dealing with health issues for a long time, passed away. He left this world quietly, as if he just fell asleep. After the funeral and when things had settled down, my mother decided to use the inheritance to move to a quiet apartment in the suburbs. And so, I inherited the high-rise apartment. The high-rise apartment was more conveniently located near the station than our current one. That evening, I proposed to Ted that we move there. I've inherited the high-rise apartment where my parents used to live. My mom has decided to move to a different one in the suburbs. How about we move to the high-rise one? Of course, it will be after my mom moves out. Upon hearing my suggestion, Ted's face lit up and he exclaimed, "Lucky," and started to celebrate. He then took out his phone and made a call. "Hello, Mom. I have some great news." He seemed to be talking to his mother, telling her that I had inherited my father's high-rise apartment. After ending the call, Ted turned to me with a smug smile and made a demand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Give me the keys." "What?" I was taken aback and reflexively asked him to clarify. "I mean the keys to the high-rise apartment. I want to go check it out. I know the place and have visited before, but I haven't thoroughly checked it out apart from the living room. I'll just go and see." "What are you planning?" "My mom is still there. What if you disturb her by suddenly showing up? Besides, it's already late." I felt an ominous premonition about Ted's high spirits. "Oh, right. Your mom is still there. Let's at least look at it from the outside then." I didn't understand his urgency, but Ted couldn't wait and I ended up accompanying him. The high-rise apartment was about a 15-minute walk from our current one. On the way there, the uneasiness I was feeling didn't subside. The reason for my uneasiness was Ted's unusually excited demeanor since learning I inherited the high-rise apartment, which seemed somewhat creepy. His eyes seemed to glow with ambition. Still, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Standing in front of the high-rise apartment and looking up at the 40-story building, Ted exclaimed in amazement. "Wow, looking at it again, it's really big. Living here would be." And all of a sudden, he made an unbelievable statement. "I'm going to live in this high-rise apartment with my mom. I want a divorce." I couldn't hide my confusion at the sudden statement my husband made. I had a feeling that Ted was eyeing the high-rise apartment, but I never expected him to bring up divorce. It seems like my husband was planning to live in the high-rise apartment I inherited from my father with his mother after our divorce. I wonder what he's thinking. I have had my share of frustrations regarding my husband ever since our marriage. Yet, I never considered divorce because there were aspects of him I respected. However, I never dreamt he would suggest starting a life with his mother in the home I inherited. As I stood dumbfounded, my husband, with a condescending smile, said, "I'll divorce you and just take this property." I must be really lucky. Seriously. The moment I saw his unpleasant smile, my love for him completely vanished. I was taken aback by his statement but responded calmly, "Ted, it seems you might be misunderstanding something, but inheritance doesn't automatically go to the spouse." "What? What are you talking about?" Ted laughed as if he didn't understand my words at all. "I mean, this high-rise apartment is something I inherited, so it can't become yours. Inheritance laws don't apply to shared property." Even when I explained again, Ted said, "That's a joke. I won't believe such a lie." Okay, I was just perplexed. I didn't think he would be such a difficult person to talk to. "It's funny to see you trying so hard to avoid divorce. Do you love me that much?" "How pathetic," he mocked. Ted's derisive laughter was extremely unpleasant. And at that moment, I realized my feelings for Ted had vanished. There used to be a respectable side to him, but now I only felt discomfort. "If you don't agree to divorce, I'll file for arbitration. I'll live happily in this high-rise apartment with my mom," Ted said with a smirk, and I responded calmly, "I'll agree to the divorce. When we get home, let's write the divorce papers." "Nice. Surprisingly obedient, aren't you?" He answered satisfied, and when we got home, we downloaded and printed the divorce papers from the City Hall's website. Ted signed the divorce papers first, and then I signed. I've completed my part. When I handed over the divorce papers, Ted eagerly took them and said, "I'll hand these in right away," and headed to the City Hall. Thus, our brief 2-year marriage came to an end. However, I couldn't move to the new residence immediately and had to continue living with him in our current place for a while. During this time, I consulted with a lawyer about dividing the property while also preparing to move. My plan was to move to the high-rise apartment I inherited from my father. During this period, my mother-in-law suddenly visited our home. Ted wasn't home, and I had to deal with her alone. When I opened the door, she started shouting, "Why haven't you given us the apartment yet, Stacy? Hand it over to us, quickly." As I've explained to Ted several times, that house is something I inherited from my father and I can't give it to you or Ted, I responded calmly. The audacious mother-in-law then said, "Don't be so stingy. You earn a lot, right? You're so busy with work that you neglect household chores, so you must not be struggling with money. It wouldn't hurt if you gave us the property." I firmly refused her demand. "There's no way I'll give you the apartment," and closed the front door. Behind the door, she yelled, "Why are you so insolent? Tad was right to get a divorce from such a daughter-in-law. Hand over the high-rise apartment quickly." But after a while, she quieted down and seemed to have given up and left. That evening, when Ted returned home, I told him about his mother's visit. "Today, your mother came. Seems like she's expecting to live in the high-rise apartment. She hurled insults at me, and I can't take it anymore." Then Ted, as if thinking his mother had been insulted, suddenly began yelling hysterically, "What's with that attitude? My mom just wants to live in the high-rise apartment with me as soon as possible. You're the problem for not handing it over. My mom isn't at fault. Stop being stubborn and give us the property now." It's not about being stubborn. It's legally established that inheritance doesn't become shared property. It's exempt from property division. Do I need to explain it again? Even as I tried to explain, Ted wouldn't listen. I eventually successfully completed the property division process, but it took extra time and money because Ted made a fuss about not getting the high-rise apartment. Therefore, I decided to bill all the divorce expenses to him. After my mother moved to the suburban apartment, I decided to relocate to the high-rise apartment. I completed the move without Ted knowing. After moving to my new home, I changed all my contact information, cutting off all ties with him. I was worried for a while that he might come over, but fortunately, there were no signs of him coming, and months had passed. I was relieved, thinking he had accepted the reality that he couldn't live here. However, something unexpected happened. On a holiday, while I was relaxing at home, the bell suddenly rang. At that moment, I murmured to myself, "Has he finally come?" When I looked at the intercom monitor, there he was, as expected. I considered ignoring him for a while, but he persistently rang the bell, and thinking of the neighbors, I reluctantly went to the door. When I opened it, Tad was furious and shouted, "Why did you change your phone number? You've changed your email address too, right? Why didn't you tell me your new contact information? Why should I? I have no obligation to explain to you. The divorce was completed and we're no longer husband and wife, and the property division is settled, so we have nothing to do with each other anymore. Don't say nonsensical things." As I responded calmly, Ted became even more enraged. "Don't make lame excuses. I'm really angry. That's clearly not a lame excuse." Having a reasonable conversation with him was impossible, and it gave me a headache. Tad continued to shout as if he was about to pounce me. "Why can't I have this property? Because of that, I've been laughed at by my friends." "It's all your fault." "Laughed at by your friends? What do you mean?" When I asked, Tad was silent for a while before starting to speak slowly. Seems like he had bragged to his friends about having bought a high-rise apartment when we filed for divorce and I inherited this property. Envied by his friends, Ted didn't want to hear anything about how the property division didn't allow him to get the apartment and mistakenly thought that if he kept fighting, he would eventually obtain it. Even so, I've been scorned and ridiculed by my friends as a braggart for not living in the high-rise apartment, and my mother is pressuring me about when we can move in. "You're responsible for this situation." Hearing Ted's complaints, I was just astonished and lost for words. Essentially, he was blaming me for his own frustrations. I was beginning to feel foolish to continue further discussions with him, and said, "It's not my fault. I've tried to explain to you many times that the high-rise apartment is not included in the property division. There's nothing more to talk about. Please leave," and tried to close the door. However, Ted wedged his foot in the door, preventing me from closing it. "Move your foot." "Shut up. I won't leave until you say you'll hand over the high-rise apartment. You're making me look like an idiot." Ted glared at me with bloodshot eyes. "If you won't leave, I'll call the police." "Hoot, call them. Don't think such threats will make me back down. I must get this property at any cost." While Ted dismissed the threat, I calmly took out my cell phone from my pocket. "Wait, are you seriously calling the police?" Ignoring Ted's nervous whisper, I completed the call to the police. Ted turned pale and shouted, "I didn't think you'd actually call the police. Are you crazy?" And quickly left the scene. In the following days, life returned to normal, and it seemed the shock of being reported to the police made Ted avoid contacting me. However, 3 months later, I found an envelope in my home's mailbox. It had no addressee, suggesting someone had delivered it directly. Who could this be from? I muttered to myself as I turned the envelope over to find Ted's name written on it. Shocked, I cautiously opened the envelope, wary of any dangerous contents. Inside were 3 letters, written in Ted's handwriting, detailing his recent circumstances. The letter began as follows: "To Stacy, since I can no longer reach you, I am honestly sharing my current situation through this letter. Please read it to the end." With a mix of curiosity and annoyance, I began to read the letter. As I read on, it became clear that soon after our divorce, Ted had found a new lover and planned to live with her and his mother in this high-rise apartment. However, when it became apparent that Ted could not secure this place, the lover, who was merely attracted by the allure of the apartment, left him. Moreover, Ted had given her expensive gifts, which made him go into a significant amount of debt. He had also talked about purchasing the high-rise apartment at work, leading to unbearable cold stares from colleagues, ultimately causing him to resign. It appeared that his mother, who had been counting on living in the high-rise apartment, had been spending extravagantly and was now facing tough times without the expected support from Ted. The letter concluded with "I have laid everything out honestly. So, please, I'm begging you, could you lend me some money? Just $10,000 would be enough. If you wish, we could even consider starting over." I had no intention of replying or reconsidering our relationship. Ted's assertive demeanor throughout the letter only elicited a sigh from me. It seemed that Ted was in a dire situation and had reached out to me for financial aid. I tossed the letter into the trash and immediately headed to the real estate agent. Given the possibility of Ted showing up at my current place and not wanting to receive such bewildering letters again, I decided to sell it, although it was a place I had inherited from my father, making me feel somewhat guilty. I believed my father would forgive me if it were for my happiness. My mother also agreed with my decision. I then proceeded to purchase another high-rise apartment, one with an even better location, which admittedly was quite expensive. However, thanks to my hard work and savings, I didn't hesitate to splurge on it. Of course, I didn't share my new address with Ted, so now I was finally able to live with peace of mind. I resolved to focus on my work again, renewing my commitment to my career.